I'd like to speak with you about helping your church become a world evangelism church and you a world evangelism Christian. And the way you would do that, number one, is you got to get the heartbeat of God. So we've got to maybe turn off some of the television programming and maybe change some of the things we read and watch and focus on what the Word of God says and get God's heart for His Word and for Him and what He wants. We need to do some real in-depth study of basic world evangelism doctrine. And I'd like to do that with you real quickly. Here's the questions, and you ask them for yourself, and you meditate on them. I can't give you the answers. I can answer to God for me. I'm His servant. I'm not yours. I am your servant, but directly I'm His servant. And you're not mine. You're directly His servant. But are the lost people really lost? If they don't believe in Jesus Christ, are they really lost? Are they really on their way to hell? How about this one? Is there a real burning hell? Is it true that in hell He lifted up His eyes being in torment? Is it true that there's a lake of fire where death and hell will be cast in a lake of fire and they'll be in torment forever? Is that true? You have to answer that question. You have to answer that question. Do you think that those who never hear will really go to hell? Have you ever thought about the thousands and millions in China that'll never hear and they will one day wake up in hell? Now it gets more personal than that, far more personal. Are you responsible to God to get the gospel to them? You know, if everybody ought to be doing it, and somebody surely is doing it, maybe I don't have to do anything. Do you believe it's the responsibility of the church, the local church, your church, to get the gospel to the world? Does God truly love everyone and want everyone saved? When He said for God to love the world, did He mean that? Do you realize the position you play in your church as the pastor or the deacon or the Sunday school teacher or just a church member? Are you convinced of the need? If you're not eat up with it, they won't be. How long has God had this plan? How long has God been doing this? If we don't get the gospel to them, who will? Is it true that we have the words they need to hear? I don't know. You'll know the answer to that question. You'll know the answer to that question far more than I will. And so I would ask you, do we have those answers? So let me give you some ideas about what I think being a world evangelism church would include. Number one, it's got to include where you live, knocking on all the doors around where your church is so as many people as possible can hear the gospel. Do you realize if you knock on 10 to 13,000 houses around your church, you will have reached 50,000 people. 4 people per house, 13,000 houses, that's over 50,000 people. That's a very large field for you to work at. If you did that 2 times a year, you'd have to knock on it as a team, as a whole church, up to 250 doors a week. And that's not that hard. If you have 25 people, it's only 10 doors. You could use the mail system. You could use television, radio, the internet. But we must be committed to getting the gospel to our area so that people hear the gospel. That we must be committed to getting our church to do everything it can to get the gospel around the world, like praying for missionaries, like having a missions conference. And I know it's inconvenient to our people. Nowadays they need to stay home and play video games, and pastors are down to mission Sundays or mission mornings or mission days. But maybe it's a time to call our people back and say, no, let's cut out the world and let's do something. What percentage is your church willing to give away to get the gospel to the world? What percentage is your church willing to give away to get the gospel to the world? I just want to challenge you. We've got to get involved in getting the gospel to the world. We want to be a world evangelism church. So we need to speak to everybody where we go. We need to give out as many gospel tracts as we can. I've heard the people who make fun of giving out gospel tracts, but the truth is nothing works. Inviting people to church doesn't work, so let's don't do that. Giving out tracts doesn't work, so let's don't do that. It won't be long till you'll be a primitive, hard-shell Christian who doesn't care whether people die and go to hell or not. Stop it with the excuses. Start being the person who loves enough to care about going out and telling people how to get to heaven. Obey God. Get a passion for getting the gospel to the world. Give. Invite missionaries in. Make missions trips. Take your church to the mission field. We need to be world evangelism churches. That's what's needed in our day. And I'm challenging you to pray about being a world evangelism church.